Hello everyone, how's it going? Hope you're having a nice evening if you're tuning in live. If you're watching the recording, I hope you're having a nice day so far. I thought I would go ahead and share more of the process of making this illustration painting. I know it's pretty late on Sunday evening. It's 8:30, so I'm not expecting to get a whole lot of viewers during this live stream, but I felt like painting before I get ready for bed today, and thought I would share whatever progress is made on this painting with you. Got my tea. And we can get started. Okay, so in the last live stream, I worked on a few kind of focal areas. We spent some time developing the reflected light on the bottom of this floating form here. I put a lot of changes into this upper left corner over here, especially with the warm setting sunlight on the bottom of the clouds there. And then towards the end of the session, I created this warm orange rim light around the cattails and this small little chunk of earth or rock and plants there on the right side of the painting. Last night, before I fell asleep, I was looking at a photograph of the painting and where I had left off in the last live stream. And I was trying to figure out what are some large key changes that I want to make in this painting. And I'm thinking that I want to make this lower part of the canyon a little bit more vibrant and saturated. So I think I'll start there and then see what happens. Another change that I had made on my phone through this app that I like to use called Autodesk Sketchbook. It's a super easy to use app. It's kind of like Photoshop, but it's a very watered down version of Photoshop, so you can work on it on a mobile device pretty easily. But the other area that I was looking at was along the horizon line here. I like that the rainfall changes the color properties along the horizon over on this side, and I could see a little bit more of a break somewhere over here being helpful for the design, because the values in this area and on our middle ground floating object here are very close together. So I feel like some of the impact of this object is getting lost in terms of contrast there. So these two areas I think are what I'll start with in the stream tonight. All right, let's get started here. I might just adjust the camera actually before I get too deep into the painting process, just so it's not quite as close to my face. Perfect. Okay. Let's grab ultramarine blue and a little bit of phthalo blue, a little bit of white, just to lighten everything up. Sometimes if I'm mixing up a color, I'll hold my palette knife in front of the painting and compare the relationship of the new mixture to that area of the painting. And that can be a pretty efficient way of figuring out what direction or movement the color has to take, like if it's too dark or too light or too chromatic or too achromatic. too warm, too cool, and so on. Let's try. Let's see what this looks like. This is pretty dark. I think I'm going to go lighter. Sometimes what I'll do if I'm making a change like this in a painting, if the surface is really dry, sometimes I'll oil out that area using my gel medium, and that helps this second or new layer of oil paint adhere to the surface a bit more effectively, but it also helps to create a more gradual edge to whatever it is you're painting into the painting. Like this edge right now is very sharp and clear because I'm painting over a dry surface, but the reason I did not oil out in this example is because I feel like some of the paint in this area is still wet and I don't want to smear these colors around too much, so I'm just going to have to use more of a dry brush technique to get this to be a softer edge when I'm ready for that step. But right now I just want to block in this color and use this as a way to separate some of the shapes in the painting. So then I can take a new brush that doesn't have any paint on it and just gently feather out this edge. This makes it really easy to make very minimal changes to some of my shapes and edges, which is really handy at this point in the painting process. Maybe I'll move the camera a little bit closer, that way it doesn't keep focusing on my hand. So I'm trying to decide if I want to continue this color all the way down. I think it makes sense for this color to recede all the way down to that vanishing point, so maybe I'll put it in and I could always wipe it out or paint over it and make it darker if I want later. But I already like this a lot better because it makes it easier to separate the two waterfalls down in the foreground. That's another part of the painting where the values of multiple shapes were very close together. And it's really easy to group them when you're looking at the painting and go, well, is it all one big shape? Is it two forms? Is it three? And this really helps create a bit more contrast and just a little bit more drama, I think, which is nice. Like, it makes it feel like there's this really deep space in the foreground between these two waterfalls. Maybe I'll even try to create more of an atmospheric effect here with a softer edge. Let's see what happens. I mean, I think that kind of works. Maybe I'll pull a little bit more of this blue up into this distant waterfall. It'd be kind of nice to keep this blue in another area of the painting, so I'm going to try bringing it up into this detail up here and see if that does anything helpful. Yeah, it's kind of interesting how it gets darker in the middle like that. I like what this did now, so I'm going to go ahead and move up to the horizon area that I was talking about earlier. See if that can maybe be resolved in a similar way, just with one color think I used kind of a bluish color when I was messing around on my phone in that app. Maybe more of a greenish blue. Since there is a green area of the sunset over on that side, I think it would make sense to have a slightly greenish color here. This might be too light. Let's see, let me bring that down a little bit. That's better. So most of this is to help this red form on the right stand out a bit better from the background. I don't know how well this is going to work, but we're going to try it and then go from there. It seems really bright, so let's try to soften it, and then if it's still too bright, I can always go over it or just forget this idea and go back to the cloud color. I like the shape of what's happening. I don't know if I love this green color though. Feels a little out of place, so maybe it needs to be maybe it just needs to be more blue. Let me add a little bit more blue and see if that helps. I mean, it could also just be too vibrant and chromatic, so I'm going to grab a little bit of burnt sienna to try to tone down some of the chroma on that bluish green color. Make it a little bit more gray. I wish I would have thought about doing this when this cloud area was still wet, but you know, sometimes you don't think of stuff until you're almost done with a painting, and then you just have to work with what you have. I'm wondering if maybe part of the problem is that this left side is a totally different color. I mean, that seems to be helping. If I can balance it out here. I mean, that green is an odd color, but luckily it's not such a high contrast in terms of value. I think I might be able to get away with using this green here. I just really want this to read like a storm, and that's the only criteria that I'm worried about visually here. I mean, I can use interpretive colors and play with the edges of the shapes, but it's really all about trying to get this to feel like a distant storm. Can't decide if I like what's going on here now. Maybe this edge is too sharp. Let's try to soften this. I think that helps. The area I don't really believe now is this over here. Like, that color just does not seem like it's supposed to be so green and colorful. Let's try to change this real quick too, though. I mean, that helps to lighten up the background over there. I'm going to try to see if maybe making this a bit more neutral, if that might start to read a little bit closer to like a wall of rain in this storm. This might be too dark. Yeah, it's too dark. So I'm adding a little bit of alizarin permanent into my greenish blue pile that's on my palette here. I think that helps. Doesn't seem quite so flat now. Okay, let's soften the edge there, because that does not look real with such a sharp diagonal line. One of the things that's really fun about making paintings like this is that because everything is just invented, you can try something and go, well, that does not work, you know, or that doesn't look believable. It's really fun to be able to use an intuitive process to make a painting where you don't have a reference to compare it to. You just have to judge the painting for its qualities that it currently has at that moment, you know? And every time you change something, you can compare it to what it looked like before, which is fun. But generally, I think I'm thinking about, well, maybe it needs to be farther in this direction that I'm changing it currently. Like, it's like maybe that less chromatic color of the rain, like, it needs to be even more gray, or it needs to be even lighter or darker. But sometimes you're like, well, I'm going to try this color, and then you're like, that was the wrong direction. You know, like, it needs to stay on the cooler side, or it needs to stay on the darker side of the value spectrum. One thing I want to try here is to create a small pocket of space in this storm to see if maybe I can get away with like a really cool zone in terms of temperature. I don't think that's going to work. Maybe I'll actually try a warmer section. Like, this might be able to read as like this warm greenish orange color along the horizon in the sky. So let's see what happens if that's too chalky. Let's grab a little bit of orange. I have quite a bit of paint in this little corner right now, which is going to make this pretty interesting, because every color that's on here is going to stay wet the whole time I work on this tonight, and that might just start to get really dull and muddy. But you know what? Sometimes I end up liking that part of the painting because of that mixing of wet colors. So this is another one of those moments where I'm like, I kind of like the shape, I just don't know if the color is right. It's more of a drawing, like I'm trying to balance a drawing problem and a color problem at the same time. Maybe the shape is a little too distinct. I need to soften things a little bit so it feels like it's far away. That might be part of the problem right now. I don't even know how clear that part of the painting is at the moment. Let me move my camera real quick. Oops. There we go. Okay, I think that's helping actually. I'll leave that how it is for now and then decide to come back or not later. Okay, I think that light green color is really nice, but I don't like this shape right here. We're just going to take this all the way along the horizon here. Yeah, I think that works. Cool. I think that helps the background a lot. Let me pull it back here for you and see what this looks like from a distance. Hoping there's not too bad of a glare, but maybe if I bring this back up here. I'm going to try to turn off my other studio lights and see what happens. I'm just going to leave those off, I think. Just because there's quite a lot of glare otherwise. Okay, let's see what needs to change now. So I definitely think that blue on the bottom should stay. I think that's helping create a lot of depth in the painting. I wonder if I should make the blue lighter or darker as it gets closer to the foreground. This is the area I'm talking about here. Yeah, I'll have to think about that a little bit. Maybe the next step is to work on some of the warm reflection of temperature from this object on the water. So I'm going to do that for a little while and then see what needs to change. Grab a little bit of cadmium orange, alizarin permanent, cadmium red. These are all really intense reds. Yellow ochre. Let's see what this looks like. It's pretty dark, actually. I'm trying to imagine like the ripples in water, if they're moving towards the edge of the waterfall, like what sort of shapes might be seen with this red reflected light, and remembering times where I've sat by a dam and watched the water like in like a very silky way create these organic lines and shapes. So that's sort of the idea I'm thinking about right now as I'm putting in these warm highlight reflections here. This is such an awkward corner right here, this foreshortening that's happening, but also trying to imagine the direction of the water as it's reaching the edge, because I kind of want this to feel like the edge of the waterfall is meandering through the design, but then as it gets closer to the bottom in the foreground, I want it to feel like it's really close to the viewer. So I'm trying to think about water coming in almost at like this, sharp diagonal angle so that it feels like the water's coming out at you. But then I also need to think about where the edge of the cliff is. So I'm just going to draw with this red color for right now to try to help me understand the anatomy of this object. And then I'll have to adjust that line later on, but man, water is something that I need to practice painting a lot more often. And it feels like the kind of thing where like less is more. You want to try not to overwork the idea, but part of the idea is that it feels like water, and that we can feel this like very smooth but dramatic movement of the water. Yeah, it does not feel like this is working very well. Maybe I should try a slightly bigger brush and then think more in terms of shapes for this. So we're gonna change brushes and hope that maybe it starts to make more sense, because this is definitely not going the way I want it to at the moment. I feel like when I hit this point in a painting, I usually am like, okay, I just need to disrupt the system that I'm looking at right now, and even if it's not the right decision, whatever I'm doing at the moment or about to do, it'll tell me, why it's not working. If I'm really paying attention to the relationships in the painting, I can think like, well, the shapes are too small, the lines are too thin, the angles are off, the color's too bright, and that will help me find a sense of direction on where to go with the painting. But a lot of times the first idea, like these shapes and lines I just put in, like that feels like, okay, this is my first idea with that part of the painting in terms of painting the warm reflections, and I'm just intuitively designing the lines and the shapes and trying to convey this feeling of very silky, smooth water, and didn't take very long to feel like, well, that's not really the look, or that's not really reading like this type of perspective, or this sense of surface quality. And then it's like, okay, let's try again, let's try something else, or push what I just did a little bit in a different direction and hope that it starts to feel better. But I could see this part of the painting as like really abstract, organic shapes that feel like ripples in the water as the water's moving and rushing over the side. I don't want this to feel like the water's moving very quickly. I think it would be a lot more interesting if the water feels like it's very calmly moving over the cliffside there. So I think the shapes are going to be pretty graphic and sharp, so that it doesn't feel like there's a lot of energy or movement. That's sort of the mental picture that I have, and as I'm looking at this part of the painting and going, well, I could see this working in this abstract, graphic kind of way, but I don't know, I feel like it's going to take me a few attempts to get it right, or to at least get close to what I'm picturing in my head. Part of the problem right now might be that this color is just super chromatic and too too like high contrast against the blue of the water. Let's see, maybe this line needs to come all the way down like this. I think I'm struggling a lot with this angle and trying to figure out how the water moves around this corner. Maybe this could be a little bit more vertical here, actually. Okay, that looks a little bit better. I'm going to try to just do some dry brush technique here and keep a softer edge. And maybe that can help give a little bit of that motion blur effect in the foreground, which that was something I talked about in one of the other streams on this painting. Is like, you know, I like this idea that maybe the foreground is a little bit softer, which will keep more of the focus up in this part of the painting. And I think that'll just make it feel a little bit more cinematic and pleasing to look at. So let's try to just soften some of this information. I think they can get clearer and sharper as we get closer to this level of depth, but I think in the foreground I'm going to try to just soften things and see if I can get this to I don't know, just to work visually in the painting. You know, I think part of the problem and part of the reason why I'm struggling with this part of the painting is because I didn't really resolve a lot of this in my drawing. So, you know, I wasn't really designing some of these shapes in the water. I wasn't really thinking about how the water is going to create lines that will recede but also move forward in space towards their turning point over the cliff. You know, I didn't really study that angle and that turning effect and how that, you know, that turning effect starts to recede back in space as well. So then I'm trying to figure out the perspective here and the angle, because all of those lines are going to help cue us into being able to understand the landscape of the subject here. And where I've placed this edge over here, I think is okay. Like, I think this is actually, I was worried about this side because it felt very flat, but now that I'm putting in these warm shapes, I think it's going to actually be less confusing than the left side is going to be. I think the warmness of the water as it ripples over like this can actually probably be less chromatic and intense because that side of the cliff isn't catching this warm light in theory, right? It's like this top plane or this flat shape of the surface of the water is reflecting and catching the majority of this warm light source. So I do have to change the temperature or the chroma of these lines as they wrap over here. I mean, I could probably go in with a lighter bluish color or like somewhat more neutral color. That might help. have a feeling I'm going to have to mix up some of the blues that I had and repaint some of my shapes and edges, but that's okay. I also just can't decide. I think these angles are way too dramatic. I think they're kind of messing with the design of the painting, so I'm going to try to wipe some of that out real quick and start over in this area. I'm hoping that if I level out these lines a little bit more, that might be able to fix the problem, and then it'll be a bit more natural looking. I think that's probably the goal with this part of the process, is that I want the water to feel natural. So maybe it's a matter of just slightly shifting the angle of some of these lines. Like that makes more sense, right? It feels like the edge is coming down to this point here. And I'm just going to try something really kind of bold and something I'll probably have to change later, but just so I can visualize this a bit clearer. I'm going to mix a bright orange and use this as my reflection once the water turns over the cliff. So I'm going to use this just as like a new line to draw with. Okay. I think I can see it. I think I can see it now. I think this will help. Corners are really awkward. I mean, I don't know if that's really the answer, or if this is going to become the foundation for this part of the painting, but I think this is at least closer, a lot closer than where it was, so that's all good. Let's maybe do this too over here. Ay, ay, ay. This painting is starting to give me a little bit of a headache. Alright, let's move a little bit farther back in space and start painting some of the further waterfalls and this warm glow on the waterfalls that recedes. Man, I don't know, maybe it's getting too chromatic. I don't know. I'm trying to introduce a lot more alizarin, which is a cooler red, so it creates these pink peachy colors with orange and yellow ochre. The coolness of the alizarin should help with this illusion that it's the same colored light, it's just farther away, right? So like the contrast of temperature should be less intense as it recedes back along the waterfall here, but maybe actually that's part of the problem. So I'm using color that's still very chromatic. Let's try mixing a little bit of gray into this. I'm going to try to soften some of this too. Hopefully that might help things read like they're farther away. Okay, I think that works. Alright, I'm just going to try blending out some of the foreground here and softening a lot of that because it's really distracting right now. Okay, I think that helped on that side. think this edge is a little too dark now. I'm going to try to lighten this up just a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna just take a quick break and use the bathroom, and then I'll be back in a few minutes. So I'll be right back. Okay, and we're back. It's funny, I feel like I put in these red details here, and now after softening them, they look a lot like how it looked before I put those in. Eating eating some leftover Culvers right now, so you might hear me snacking in the background here. I feel like I'm at a point where I feel like the painting should be done, but I've been looking at it so long, it's like I can't tell if it has enough there for it to feel like it's done. I'm glad that I changed the horizon line and the foreground, but I kind of feel like it's just the water that needs to be resolved. And I don't know if it's already at a point where it's pretty close. But this is a pretty common moment in making a painting where I hit this zone in the painting process where I'm like, okay, I've kind of done all the things that I had planned on doing, or I've responded to the majority of areas that needed to be addressed or fixed. And now it's like I could leave it and I could say that it's done. But if I do that, are there areas where I feel like that doesn't make sense, or that doesn't really work? Like now that I'm looking at this on screen, I can really see how vivid the red is on this area, which, again, thinking about the direction of where the light is coming from, this shouldn't be quite so intense. So I think that is something I should change here in a moment. Okay. Let's try that. I think part of me also is realizing that if I put too much information into the foreground with the water, that starts to detract from this area in the painting or this area in the painting. And that kind of defeats the purpose a little bit of what I want this painting to do. So it's probably best if I just try to keep things pretty simple in this part of the painting. That's too bright. Let's try this. I do think that the bright orange reflection needs to be present in a few other areas of the water, though. So I'm going to try. It's getting closer to being done on this side, I think. The other thing I was just considering is maybe if I put a few dark blue shapes in the foreground on the left side of this, that might help this read a little bit more like water. That's probably too dark, actually. Maybe I should soften that, see if that helps. Actually, I think that does help. Just to break up that large red shape in the foreground, I think they needed something to vary the flatness of it. The other area I'm looking at again now, though, is this edge here. I feel like something is off with this edge. Like this goldish color, I feel like needs to break into this blue shape a little bit more for it to make sense. Thinking that maybe what we can do Okay, I think that helps, that edge, because it just felt very unnatural before. Hey Gigi, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, it's a fun painting. I like how kind of surreal and dreamy it is. I'm really close to being done with it. I'm trying to push the last few details here, and then I'll move on to the next painting. But how have you been? Okay, I think I'm gonna stop here for tonight on this painting. I know I didn't do a whole lot during this session, but as I said earlier, I think I'm really close to just being finished with this painting and moving on to the next project. This is good for me to, practice this process of painting from imagination and inventing the subject, where you don't have a reference to be like, okay, it looks close enough to the reference and I like it as a painting, and I can just, I can be happy with it being finished. And I used to make a lot of paintings like this when I was in school, that were from, just pure intuitive imagination, and they're fun when you're thinking about natural light and the effects of natural light, or even if it's not natural light, but you're trying to imagine how the light source in your painting would describe the environment of the painting. And I forgot how challenging it is to decide when you're finished with the painting. I'm looking at this and I'm afraid if I keep pushing, some new ideas, that it's going to become overwhelming, and overworked potentially. I think there's beauty and simplicity and efficiency of information, or economic information, where maybe one line or a few simple shapes is really the only thing you need to convey a feeling, or to convey a texture, or to convey a shadow, or whatever it is you're trying to convey. But with the water, I think I'm still just like, does it need more information in the water? I'm looking at this zone right here, and there's a lot of repetition of similar space right between these warm lines, and that feels very unnatural. So I think that probably should change, and I kind of think, what, I should do it before I stop for the night, because it's just going to get harder, I think, if I take a break and work on this again tomorrow or later this week. It might be harder for me to actually make changes in the painting. But looking at it right now, I do think that it could benefit from a little bit more variation in the shapes. So I have this very neutral pink color that I'm trying to bring in and use as a tool to separate some of these lines. I don't know how well this is going to work, but like everything else, you kind of just have to try it and then hope that you get the effect that you want. This is another part of the painting that's pretty dry. I haven't really touched these areas in the last two sessions, so I can work over this with a pretty dry, thin, a dry brush with pretty thin paint, and I don't have to worry about things getting really muddy, which is handy because I don't want to have to paint this a bunch of times and keep fiddling with it, but I think that already has helped a lot to make it feel a bit more natural looking. Yeah, I think that's a lot better. Maybe I'll put a little bit over on this side too. sometimes I think just really organic marks like this that are more of a noise effect. It's like less about creating a shape or a line, and it's really about a soft texture is enough to make it feel believable. If I can blend this a little bit, I feel like some of this needs to come into the shadow here, the shadow reflection. Yeah, okay. I think that already really helped a lot. And these two areas over here feel a little unnatural too. I think maybe I just need to blend this together. Some of these orange marks are a little too sharp. Okay, that seems pretty good. This is one of those paintings where I could just keep changing it and changing it and changing it, and like it could go on and on for weeks or months probably, but that's not really what I'm trying to do or hoping to do with this painting. So yeah, there's a weird highlight right here, and that's actually not paint, that's the texture of the paper. There was a little bit of a bubble when I mounted the paper after the glue was dry, and I lifted off my art books that I use to weigh down the paper as it's drying, so it's a really durable mount, you know, if I can do it that way. But it was starting to dry up, I think, before I even put the books on it, and at that point there were bubbles under the paper. So when I took the books off, then I could see these bubbles sitting there, and I thought maybe if I cut a hole where the bubble is and push out any air and then just prime over that maybe then the bubble would go away, or it wouldn't be so noticeable. But it worked in most of the areas where that happened, but this is one where it didn't work, and there's still a little bit of a bump, so the light is bouncing off of that little bump and making it look like there's a shift in the color of the paint. But really it's just that the paper comes up to a little bump and then it's reflecting more of the light overhead. So there are a few moments or areas or spots in the painting that kind of have that problem, but luckily I don't think it's the end of the world. You know, and a lot of the texture that I ended up with here on the paper was also accidental, and now that I'm starting to wrap up this session, I think what I'll do is share a sneak little preview of the next illustration painting that I'll be working on. And this is going to need to dry a little bit more, so I'm going to let it dry overnight. Let's take this painting off here, and we're just going to swap the next one over here. So this is a little preview of the next painting that I'll be starting this week at some point. I also have to work on a self-portrait painting, which is what you know, these thumbnail sketches are for. But you can. The reason I wanted to show this as like a quick little preview is because this mount of the paper was a lot better than the last one. You can see there's a lot less inorganic, rough, patchy spots from the matte medium that I use. If you're someone who likes drawing and painting, or maybe you're someone who likes to draw but would like to get into more oil painting techniques, matte medium's a pretty handy medium to bridge drawing into painting. And just to show you a quick example of what I'm working with. So this is a piece of Bristol like Series 500 drawing paper. It's acid-free and archival. It's made out of 100% cotton, so it's a really safe drawing surface because you don't have to worry about, you know, the paper deteriorating over time with the you know, additives and binders that other papers would have. So I like using the Bristol drawing paper for that reason, the 500 series for that reason. And it's pretty easy to erase and redraw things. I mean, you can see some ghost shapes here that I tried to erase out and get rid of, but the 500 series paper is a little bit more toothy and pulpy on the surface, and it's hard to get, you know, to get back to that completely fresh, white, smooth surface of the paper, but it still works pretty well. And then the paper is fixed with a spray fixative that I use. Actually, I can grab that real quick too. But for anyone who's interested, or like I said, if you're someone who likes to draw and you want to get into different types of painting, but you don't want to have to redraw your entire drawing or sketch, this is a technique that has been really helpful for these kinds of paintings that I like to make. That, you know, it's really fun to compose and invent subject matter just with graphite pencils, because you don't have to worry about, you know, texture and color properties and paint consistency. You can just compose and imagine and develop a concept with you know, graphite. So it allows you to really play with the shape of your, you know, character, or the character of your shapes, and values and some of those details. But then once you get into painting, it's a lot easier to focus on things like color and atmosphere and that kind of stuff. But this is what I use to fix my drawings once they're done. And it's not perfect. I mean, if I spray this for 20 or 30 seconds over the drawing, and I always do this outside. You don't want to use that stuff indoors. And then I let it dry for at least an hour, maybe 2 or 3 hours, if not longer. Usually it's emitted most of like the fumes and like off-gassed long enough after a few hours that I can bring it back inside. And at that point, if I take my finger and wipe into the drawing, it's a lot less fragile of a drawing. There's a lot less graphite that ends up on my fingertips. So at that point, then what I'll do is take the drawing and glue it down to a piece of plywood. And I have a bunch of these 11 by 14 inch pieces of 1/2 inch plywood. This one is really rough on the backside, which is kind of a bummer, but the other side was really smooth, and it doesn't really matter. This is more of a portfolio piece as opposed to something I plan to exhibit a bunch of times. But what I use to mount the paper to the plywood is this bookbinding neutral pH adhesive. And I've shown this in other videos before, but if this is your first encounter with my YouTube channel, you know, it doesn't hurt to repeat some of these things. So Line Co is the brand that I've been using, and now that I have this size bottle, what I'll do is buy their large gallon size jug and then pour it into this, and just keep replenishing this as I need to. But you get a lot more glue when you buy, like anything, right? If you can buy it in bulk, you get to save quite a bit of money in the long run. So that's like a, you know, an extra little tip on saving a little bit of money with your glue. And that's the same glue that I use to mount other types of paper to boards, or canvas or linen onto panels. I haven't had any problems with it. The bubbles that I got in the last painting that I was just talking about, the bubbles were more of a user error problem. I think I should have spent more time flattening out the paper and trying to work out the bubbles, but that drawing had a lot more graphite, and the spray fixative, I don't think I went over it enough times with the spray fixative in the one time that I sprayed it. Whereas this one, I sat here for like, you know, I was doing this for like 30 seconds. So I think every inch of the drawing was really well sealed. And then once the paper has dried to the panel for, again, at least like 3 or 4 hours, that glue I've noticed will dry fairly quickly, which is handy. Then I can seal it with matte medium. And this is the stuff that I use for sealing drawings. For oil painting, it's a technique that I learned by watching videos from James Gurney or and Nicholas Uribe, who's another painter that I really like. But I typically will just do 2 coats of matte medium, and then I'll start working with oils over that on the drawing. So this is with 2 coats of matte medium, and it's probably dry enough to start painting, but I think it wouldn't hurt to let it dry overnight before I start working with oils over this. But you can see when I move the panel back and forth, that very subtle sheen. It has kind of a waxy surface quality. The one thing I don't love about matte medium is that, you know, if I bring back this this painting that I've been working on, is that as the paint dries, it has a very spotty like surface quality. And if I do this, you can kind of see where the paint has dried in some areas, especially if the paint was really thin. It dries to a very kind of ugly matte quality. So the thing that I would definitely try to do if I was going to exhibit this in a show at some point is to either oil out the whole painting at the end of the painting session, and if everything is really dry, or wait the like 3 months before I can varnish the painting to even out the surface. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you try out matte medium if you've never used it before. But, you know, if you're someone like me and you like making paintings that have a lot of detail and texture, you know, every now and again, it's fun to work this way. Having that drawing like this is really, really helpful because I can go in and start working with very transparent layers of paint and still see my drawing if I want some of those lines and subtle edges that the drawing is giving me. So this drawing I just recently finished last night, actually, and then I did all of the mounting and sealing and all that stuff today, and I should be able to work on it tomorrow if I want to, while my self-portrait panel is still drying. I was hoping that that would be dry by today, but I think it might need another 2 days before it's fully cured before I can really start painting. But yeah, so, you know, if you're not a subscriber to my YouTube channel, I hope you'll consider joining the group of you know, subscribers. If you have any ideas or feedback or comments that you want to leave in this video, please do that. I will definitely keep an eye on the comment section in the future. And if you haven't seen my website and checked out more of my artwork, I hope you'll take a minute to do so at some point soon. My website is akunaarts.com. You can also find that linked in the description of this live stream video. And yeah, if you have any questions, keep me posted. I'm really excited to get into this painting. The one thing I haven't started to figure out yet is what color scheme I want this painting to have. And maybe by the time I'm hoping that by the time I start the painting, if it's on a live stream again, that I'll have already figured this part of the process out. But I'll probably refer back to my handy little pocket color wheel here and use this as a guide to think about harmonious color schemes, like complementary color schemes or split complementary color schemes or a triad. Typically I try to think of like one hue that dominates a painting like this, and then look at the color wheel and go, okay, if yellow orange is my mother color, for example, you know, I could just do a complementary, like mostly a high contrast, like hue complementary color scheme, or I can tap into a little bit broader of a temperature spectrum and have a warmer and cooler complement as opposed to just the violet, the blue violet. Or I could go with a more equidistant type of palette, something like this. But the more colors I introduce, the more overwhelming it starts to feel in imagining where those colors are going to exist in the painting and how they're going to interact with each other. So I think for this painting especially, it's going to be useful to think of that mother color first. And since the last painting that I've been working on has been very blue and orange and red, it would be nice to shift gears and do something that maybe is more of a tan or a very bright brownish green color, for example. So that's the first sort of idea that I have. The other tool that I might use to decide my color palette for this painting, let me pull back my phone here real quick. The other tool that can be really helpful for determining palettes is my color chart book. And, you know, typically once I've figured out the color scheme with my color wheel, you know, if blue is one of my colors, what I can do is go in and pick a more nuanced blue as a starting point for my palette. And that just helps things become a little bit less generic and a little less intense in terms of color that comes right out of the tube, which I kind of feel like that's what's happened with the last painting that I've been working on my channel, is that a lot of the color that, especially towards the end of the process now, I feel like a lot of the color that I've been putting in is very like pure and intense, and for that reason then it feels very synthetic and very like I don't know, too punchy, if that makes sense. So it'd be nice to get into stuff that's a lot more neutral or a lot less chromatic. You know, this page is really fun to look at because everything is a lot less intense. So anyway, between those two tools, I should hopefully have my color scheme figured out by the time I start live streaming this next painting. Thank you to everybody who stopped in and hung out with me tonight during the live stream. I hope that you've had a wonderful weekend. And again, yeah, if you're not subscribed, I hope you may consider doing that. And if you're subscribed, I hope you have the like little notification bell thing turned on, because the next time I go live, then you'll be notified and hopefully we can hang out again. But yeah, I think that's probably it for this live stream. Before I forget, because I might totally space on sharing a happy kind of surprise that happened when I was making this drawing. If we look closely here at the top of this, like, you know, cloud creature thing that's like the main part of this painting, this very like light, atmospheric, breezy texture that's coming off of the top here, that wasn't intentional. I actually accidentally like must have moved like my hand or like a blanket or something over the drawing, and it smeared just a very small amount of the graphite up past the top of the paper, and I didn't notice it right away. And then all of a sudden I was like, how did that texture get there? And loved how it looked immediately. It just felt very real and very I don't know, powerful. You know, like there's this super, super tall being, whatever this is, and at the very top it has this like weird, almost like celestial, like gas or something that's emitting from the top of its body, which I think is really, really cool and interesting. And then this little circle right here is going to hopefully look like the sun when the painting is finished. That's the idea, is that this is going to be like a very middle of the day, kind of washed out, really hot looking painting in terms of temperature. I'm thinking maybe keeping things fairly neutral in terms of chroma, but in terms of value, it would be nice if it felt like this was like a really bright, almost like high key, washed out kind of a day. So that's part of the idea. So yeah, let me know what you think. And I hope you'll join me when I start to work on this painting. I think that's it for today. Thank you for tuning in and for supporting my artwork. I hope you have a great Monday and that I get to see you in the next live stream. So, all right, I'm going to end things there. And actually, one thing I've been meaning to do is share my palette during the live stream at some point. I said this in an earlier live stream that I'm going to try to research ways to get a second camera for live streaming, because it would be nice to share this point of view and whatever I'm working on simultaneously. And that way, if you're somebody who is, really into the process of making paintings, then you can get a lot more out of these live streams. So yeah, I wanted to share what my palette looked like during this session. And this is actually kind of how it looked the last 2 live streams at the end of those videos as well. So it's funny how much I'm bouncing around the painting, but in terms of mixing up color, there's really not a whole lot going on, and the paint is super thin because I'm essentially glazing in the oil painting. So okay, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great night, and I will see you in the future. Okay, bye.